Hello and welcome everyone. So today, as a continuation of our decolonization unit, we're going to be talking about the country of India and its fight for independence from Great Britain. So during the years of British rule in India, there was really, because of the networking connections, so to speak, of the British Empire, there became a class of uh, Indian citizens who were educated in the West. So European countries, Great Britain, the United States, and with this new class, these ideas of democracy and equality that were so streamlined into Western culture um, started to begin this nationalist movement where there was a fight to throw off this British rule that was happening in India and ending the British Empire's uh, hold over the country. And so nationalist leaders, those that believed in a free and independent India, they formed the Indian National Congress, or INC. And this later became known as the Congress Party. And so they wanted independence from Britain, but they still supported these ideas of modernization within India to make to match where the rest of the world was really going at this point in terms of industrialization, in terms of some of the political ideas that I talked about before, um, and to really put India in a good place as they went forward. However, in terms of fighting for independence, just like we saw with a lot of the African countries, things become so much more complicated when you're trying to put them into practice. There are so many different viewpoints of people who want to be represented and should be represented, and their goals don't necessarily always match the other. Um, and so when you look at India, really there's a religious divide that is occurring within India. And the country is a majority Hindu country. However, there are huge portions of the population that are Muslim or Sikh or even Christian and Jewish. And so fighting to work some of those different viewpoints, especially the largest two, which are Hindus and Muslims, um, is oftentimes a struggle at that point. And so, in this Indian National Congress, the Muslims began to resent Hindu dominance as the majority in this Congress party. And so they formed what was called the Muslim League in order to pursue their own interests. And started to soon talk about a separate Muslim state, feeling that they could not fully, find one independent India with Hindu populations. And in the middle of all this rise in nationalism and this fight to start to secure an independent India was not met with necessarily, love by the British Empire. And all of this came to a head in what was called the Amritsar Massacre. And so in this massacre, what had happened leading up to it is that Britain had passed laws forbidding public gatherings to stop protests. They had also arrested several independent nationalist leaders. And so thousands took to the street. And the British Empire ended up, countering this with an uh, armed fighters in order to stop the protests. And so, in a very unfortunate turn, the British troops ended up opening fire on the crowd and killing 379 people. And instead of quelling the rebellion, quelling the nationalist movement, this became a turning point. and increased India's commitment to fight for freedom, knowing that and seeing that, we need to be able to make a self-determination on our own independence. And so here you see a artist rendering of what was happening. Again, 10,000 people protesting for the rights of India and being met with gunfire, and a monument as well. And so in the middle of all this, a nationalist leader starts to emerge by the name of Mohandas Gandhi. And you may see him called the Mahatma, which means enlightened one. And Mohandas Gandhi is one of the most significant freedom fighters in the history of the world. He's inspired so many, including Martin Luther King Jr., in terms of fighting for a non-violent form of protest. Instead of returning gunfire on the British Empire that had fired upon them, they were going to do things in order to not cooperate, but also not be violent. And so Gandhi really believed in something called Satyagraha, and this was known as the truth force. So using nonviolence to end injustice, to have a passive resistance, where you are resisting, but you are not sort of giving them ammunition to return with violence. As he was known to say, an eye for an eye makes the whole world blind. And so if you return fire with fire, then none of us win. And he also practiced something called civil disobedience. And this goes to that nonviolent resistance. But it is the refusal to obey an unfair law and the consequences that come with that. But in resisting against it, you are pointing out the hypocrisies within it. The other thing he was fighting against was something called the caste system, in which people are put in certain classes of people, right? And between castes, you might, if someone is in a lower caste, you might not even talk to them because the rigidity of the class is so powerful. And this leads to a lot of inequalities that Gandhi was fighting against as well. And then the last thing he was fighting for was religious toleration. And this sometimes put him at odds with people from his own religion, Hinduism, as he tried to fight for more rights for Muslim people and other groups. And so we see here a poem from the Mahatma, and there that is. So one of the most powerful nonviolent resistances that he did was called the Salt March. And this really stemmed from Britain making rules that forbade the Indians from making their own salt. And the reason for this was to protect their economic interests. If they are the only ones who are exporting salt, then there is no competition to sort of bring the price down. They can set the price. Then they also placed a high tax on salt. And because this was an Indian product, this was taken from the Indian Ocean, and Gandhi viewed this as an Indian product, Gandhi ended up leading a march of Indians to protest this British tax on salt. And so he ended up going to the ocean, and we're going to see this in a clip from Gandhi in class. He goes to the ocean and takes just a pinch of salt and leads thousands to this. And this non-cooperation against these salt laws ended up breaking down some of these things and made him really world famous. So Gandhi, like I said, traveled 200 miles to the coast of India. 50,000 others made salt at the Indian Ocean, again taking their pinches of salt. And the British, again, instead of responding in nonviolence, ended up responding in violence. But what this does is that people across the world see this on newsreels and other things. The Indian people are being nonviolent. They're just taking some salt, and the British Empire is fighting back with violence. And so this, becomes sort of a uh, good promotion for the ideals of Indian nationalism. And even British citizens are questioning whether they should keep India as a colony anymore. And so the ultimate outcomes of all of this is that one, Great Britain over time realizes it can no longer hold on to its colony. In the course of this, as Indian nationalism and India becoming its own independent country becomes a reality, Hindu and Muslim individuals have many conflicts between these two groups. Muslims feel like they can't live under Hindu control. They feel like they'll be mistreated. And when in 1947, India ends up receiving its independence and the subcontinent becomes divided into a independent India, these conflicts really start to become even more pressing. And that is eventually going to lead to a breakup of India into India, a mostly Hindu country, and Pakistan, a mostly Muslim country. And we can see the leaders there in terms of these two sides, the Hindu Nehru and the Muslim Ali Jinnah. And the division between these two people, as we start to see India break up into India and Pakistan, leads to violence and fear. And there was a huge march of Muslims once Pakistan became its own country, and vice versa, where Hindus are leaving Pakistan and fleeing to India, where in passing by each other, it led to huge amounts of violence and huge riots as people, fought in skirmishes between the two sides. And so, while it is good that India became independent, there was a lot of struggles in order to, find that stability within the people. Now, like I said, there were a lot of skirmishes, and unfortunately, an estimated 1 million people, which is something that we can't necessarily wrap our minds around, ended up dying in the violence. And so, what also happened was that Gandhi, in the course of this anger between these two sides, Gandhi, who is such a powerful messenger of peace and nonviolence, ended up becoming assassinated by someone who was Hindu as well, who believed that Gandhi had betrayed the people of India by trying to give in too much to the Muslims in order to keep the peace. And so here we see India, which will one day sort of be broken up into Pakistan and Bangladesh and Sri Lanka, sort of be broken up by these inner tensions. So here we see that, these inner tensions between religious groups leads to not just one India, but India, and then to the northwest Pakistan, and to the northeast as well, Pakistan. And that eastern portion of Pakistan ends up becoming Bangladesh in the 1970s. And so you sort of see that these inner tensions again sort of, divide a people and set them on a separate course. So if you have questions over any of these independence movements, including India, which we talked about today, please let me know. I think it's a powerful reminder for the how nuanced a lot of these fights for independence can become over on top of just fighting for freedom. All right, have a good day.